Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1970 to take a look at the third album, Wonderful World, Beautiful People, by Jamaican reggae legend Jimmy Cliff. Now, Jimmy Cliff was born James Chambers on July 30th, 1944 in St. James, Jamaica. He released his first record, Hard Road to Travel, in 1967, and he followed that up in 1968 with the release of his sophomore album, Live from Brazil. Now, originally released in 1969 under the name Jimmy Cliff on Trojan Records. It would be a year later that the album would be rebranded and renamed by A&M Records for its release in the United States in 1970. Now, my personal relationship with this record goes back to probably either late 1996 or early 1997. I had just recently moved to the Bay Area from my hometown. And not long after landing in my new home, I became acquainted with a bunch of guys who lived in a house not far from where I lived. Now, within the neighborhood, their house was affectionately or unaffectionately, depending on your point of view, dubbed the punk rock house. And in, I would say, relatively short order, I had befriended some of the guys who lived in that house. Their house was known for being one of the big sort of neighborhood hangouts. People would go there, they would listen to music, they would drink, they would laugh. It wasn't necessarily, having parties, but it was always sort of a party atmosphere. And these were guys who were, a little bit older than I was. They were really into the kind of music that I was starting to get into. And, not long after I started hanging out with these guys, they sort of, took me under their wing and they put me into their, sort of apprenticeship program for musical fandom. I mean, these guys taught me about a lot of artists that I was completely ignorant of before I started hanging out with them. And one of the, the big things that they really sort of got me interested in was Jamaican music. Now, apart from sitting around listening to a bunch of punk rock records, these guys would always, throw on, different sort of styles of Jamaican music. At the time, this was something that I was, really sort of not interested in. This was the type of music that, how and where I grew up, this was the type of music I felt like I couldn't really relate to. Having come from where I was living the past, 2.5 years going to school, I had somewhat of a negative association with the style of music. Before the 2.5 years before I moved to the Bay Area, I was living in a college town taking college classes. And I always kind of associated, artists like Bob Marley or any sort of, Jamaican music with the guys who lived in the frat houses, just a couple of blocks off campus. Those were people that, in my opinion, weren't necessarily the most savory gents in town. They weren't people that I necessarily had a lot in common with. They weren't really people that I got along with. And, sort of wrongfully, I indicted this entire style of music just based on the fact that whenever you would walk by one of the Greek houses near campus, they always had a Bob Marley tapestry, flying in the front window, or at least seemingly. And, even back in those days, I was aware that it wasn't so much that these guys were really, Bob Marley or reggae fans. It was just basically an excuse to smoke some cabbage, if you know what I mean. So for a long time, I was sort of closed-minded to this type of music. When these guys would put on, Jamaican records, I would make my opinion known that it wasn't something that I liked. It wasn't something I was interested in. I didn't want to hear any of it. I didn't want to hear nothing at first. But over the course of, I would say, 2, 3, maybe 4 months, it got to where I actually began to develop, a slight appreciation for the style of music. And occasionally when somebody would take requests as to what, other people wanted to listen to when it came to the CD or record player. A few times I even heard myself blurt out the name of this Jamaican artist or that Jamaican artist, the few that I was at least familiar with by name at that point in time. So over the course of, like I said, several months, it got to where I very slowly began to develop an appreciation for the style of music. It was also these same guys that sort of taught me the history of reggae within the punk community. They taught me the story about Don Letts at the Roxy in London. And I remember thinking to myself, well, you know what? If it's good enough for Don Letts, it's pretty much good enough for me. That's a motto I live by pretty much 30 years later. I remember when I first started becoming really interested in this style of music, and I wanted to sort of develop my own collection of the music. I remember the first time I decided to go into a record store and perhaps purchase some Jamaican music. I remember walking into that section of the record store, and I felt as if I was walking into a labyrinth. I mean, there were all of these artists I'd never heard of. There were all these records I'd never seen before. And I do remember this was not the first Jamaican record I ever bought, or Jamaican style record I ever bought. I am fortunate in the sense that the first Jamaican record I bought, I should say Jamaican style record I bought, because it was by a British band, Steel Pulse. I remember kind of thumbing through the reggae section at one of my local record stores and seeing the album art for the Steel Pulse record, Earth Crisis. And I remember thinking, I don't care what this sounds like. I have to own this record. Unfortunately for me, I took it home, and that is still to this day one of my favorite records of all time, by probably my favorite reggae band of all time. So I sort of, got lucky, at least with my first sort of Jamaican purchase. Apart from that, I wasn't having a lot of luck. That I would, sometimes I would buy records I became very frustrated with. I didn't really know what I was looking for. And I do remember one day specifically, I was talking to one of the guys who lived in that house, and I was really, kind of seeking out some advice. I was like, I'm really starting to kind of get into this style of music, but, I'm buying a lot of stuff I don't really like. I'm buying a lot of cheesy stuff from the 80s. And he was the one that basically pointed me in the direction of this record. He basically explained to me that he thought that this record would be an excellent sort of introductory course into the genre, into this style of music. And he went basically as far as saying anybody who doesn't own this record is basically masturbating. So with his recommendation in my mind, I went back to my local record store, and I picked up a copy on CD at the time of this record, Wonderful World, Beautiful People. I took it home, and it completely blew my mind. This record, probably I would say as responsible as any, probably this and Earth Crisis by Steel Pulse, as really planting the seed that would blossom into my obsession over this style of music that has lasted almost 30 years up to this point. It's funny though, it did take me a long time, even though I started to get into Jamaican music. I think it was this sort of prejudice I had in my head, specifically over Bob Marley, for many years, even after becoming sort of a Jamaican music fan, because for many years I was very guilty of talking trash about Bob Marley. Again, I think it goes back to those sort of dudes that were living near me when I was going to college. I'd always talk about how sucky Bob Marley was and how much he was overrated. And I do believe, in some ways, I do think Bob Marley is overrated. To me, Bob Marley is sort of, equivalent to like the Beatles. Whenever somebody tells me that Bob Marley is the greatest Jamaican artist of all time, I sort of roll my eyes. It reminds me of when, you hear those classic rock dads tell you that they think the Beatles are the greatest band of all time. It's like, yeah, I get why you think that, but, that really isn't the case. Anyway, let's get into this record just a little bit. This is the 1970 version of the record, Wonderful World, Beautiful People. Like I mentioned, it was originally released in 1969 under the name Jimmy Cliff on Trojan Records. My copy is an original 1970. I've had this thing for a very long time. You can see it's definitely got some mileage on it. The sleeve is really not in necessarily the greatest condition, but the vinyl still plays well. And this is a record I'm not getting rid of, basically until they plant me in the dirt. To me, this is a record, like I said, this record came out in 1970, at least this version of it. This record was produced by Larry Fallon and Leslie Kong. And to me, this is one of the most perfect sounding records ever made. I love the production on it. I love the musicianship. I love the band. I've always told people, if I ever start my own band, which I won't, you're welcome, I would want my band to sound like the band on this record. To me, this is as perfect a record as I can possibly imagine. Another thing I love, about this record is I love Jimmy Cliff's vocal performance on this record. I think his vocal performance on this record is the best of his career, which I do believe is saying a lot because Jimmy Cliff, in my opinion, is one of the greatest, singers in the history of Jamaican music. I think that this record, the general tone of this record is dark, sometimes even desperate, but there always remains, this underlying subtle optimism and hope. This record isn't pessimistic. It's just really brutally honest. And I think it's that honesty that sort of lends, or sort of contributes to its darkness. This is, in my opinion, this is not only, one of my favorite records of all time. To me, this is one of the greatest Jamaican records ever made. This is a record I've been listening to for coming up on almost 30 years. And this is a record that I still listen to all the time. As far as the artwork goes on this record, I really love the picture of Jimmy Cliff. He's looking pretty snug. He's got a butt going. I really love the artwork. It's very sort of 1970. I'm really drawn to the artwork on the back. Of course, this is a very famous photograph of Jimmy Cliff sitting on his motorcycle. Makes me envious that I was never quite as cool as he is there. And I love the liner notes on this record. It's got this long kind of story of the very early origin of Jimmy Cliff. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I do want to sort of read the opening paragraph. I think it's a kind of a cool story about Jimmy Cliff in his adolescence. It says, when young Jamaican Jimmy Cliff was 14, he traveled down to Denby, a small town in his native country, for the annual 4-H club fair. He won first prize in the poultry judging competition. Not satisfied with being top bird, Cliff got up in front of an audience of 7,000 gathered for the fair's musical contest and belted out a searing version of Fats Domino's Be My Guest, accompanying himself with vocal interpretations of guitar, bass, and drums. The crowd went wild, and Cliff returned home to continue his musical apprenticeship under the tutelage of a jukebox in the local gin mill, blasting out the infectious sounds of Fats Domino, Little Richard, Bobby Day, and Dee Clark. I love that story. Even as a 14-year-old kid, Jimmy Cliff was on a trajectory that would lead him to becoming, I think, one of the greatest artists in his genre. Now, I hate to tell you what I was doing when I was 14, but I can assure you it wasn't that. More than likely, I was sitting around Counting the Curls on My Beanbag. Anyway, the first song on this record is a song called Time Will Tell. This is a song I really love. This is a really good, album starter. Again, I said this before, I love the instrumental, the music on this record. Musically, this is one of my favorite records of all time. Like I said, if I ever had a band, this is what I would want my band to sound like. This song is dark, it's lonely, it's melancholic, but as I mentioned before, one of the themes that kind of carries throughout this record is there is this sort of subtle dash of optimism sprinkled in it. I really love the song Time Will Tell. The next song after that is a song called Many Rivers to Cross. Again, very dark, lonely. This song is very introspective. I love the music on this song. I think this song asks the question basically how did I get here? How do I get out of here? And where in the hell am I going? This is a song I completely relate to. I actually relate to most of the writing on this record. I think that this is a beautiful song. Again, like I said, very introspective for that one. The third song on this record is, I don't know, arguably you could say maybe the biggest hit on this record. For me, it is easily my least favorite song on this record. This is really the only song on this record that I kind of don't love. The song is called Vietnam. Now, I love a good anti-war protest song, but for me, the song Vietnam, I don't dislike it. I'm not saying I dislike it, but if I had to pick a least favorite song off this record, it would probably be that one. Of course, in 2012, on his Rebirth album, Jimmy Cliff did sort of a reworked version of Vietnam, which he called Afghanistan. And again, for that album, Rebirth in 2012, that might have been my least favorite song on that record as well. It's just a song I don't love. I don't dislike it. I don't think it's a bad song. There's not a bad song on this entire record. But if I had to pick my least favorite song, it would definitely be Vietnam. The next song after that is called I'm Going to Use What I Got to Get What I Need. I think this song is very inspiring. It's about self-reliance, regardless the hand that you're dealt as a youngster. Pull yourself up at the bootstraps. Don't use your past as an excuse or as a tool for self-victimization. Make the life you want. I find this song to be very inspiring. Of course, this is something that can be easier said than done, but I do find it very inspiring. Again, I think there's that optimism in this song. I think this is actually a very upbeat, positive, optimistic song. The next song after that ends side one, which is the song Hard Road to Travel. Again, I think like the last song, the basic general theme of this song is, don't become a slave to your circumstances. Go out and kick the world's ass. Obviously that's a bad paraphrase by me, but that's sort of the feel of the song. I love those last two songs on the first side of the record. They are both very inspiring. They sort of leave you feeling as if anything is possible in this world. The side two begins with the title track, which is Wonderful World, Beautiful People. This one is, I think, a very dark song. Looking around at a world that is relatively messed up, full of racial inequality, wealth disparity, poverty, hunger, and corruption. But at the end of the day, resting assured that we as humans have it in our power to solve these social ills if we see fit. Again, I think the song is dark, but it has that underlying optimism, sprinkled throughout it. This song indicates a faith in humanity that, 1970, it may have been easier to have faith in humanity than it is in 2023. I don't know how many people in 1970 were going to Kroger wearing their Pokemon jammies. But sometimes I feel like my faith in humanity is a little bit spotty, to say the least. So to me, this song, I take more of the darkness out of this song than I do necessarily having faith in humanity at this point in time. But perhaps that's just me. The next song after that is a song I love. This song is called Suffering in the Land. Again, a dark tune. This song is a desperate cry out to combat poverty and hunger and squash wealth disparity. There's also a little jab in there at the military-industrial complex, which I think is pretty snug. I'm not going to lie. That's actually Suffering in the Land. If I had to pick a favorite song off this record, I mean, apart from Vietnam, I would say that most of this record is my favorite song on the record. But Suffering in the Land, I think, is pretty close, if it's not my favorite. The next song after that is another one of my favorite songs on this record. The song is called Hello Sunshine. I mean, to me, this song is relatively simple, really. I think this song is just a little, it's just a prayer, I think, for just a little bit of happiness, a little bit of positivity in your life. I love this song. It's very nice. It's very simple. But, compared to a lot of the, drudgery of getting through some of the social ills on this record, I actually really like Hello Sunshine. Again, I think this is just, dear God, give a guy a break once in a while type of song. I love it. The next song after that is a song called My Ancestors, a song that was written by Demetrius Tapp. To me, this song is an ode to those who came before him, his relationship with them and himself. I mean, it's relatively simple. It's right in the title. Wanting to live up to their expectations, wanting to be seen in their eyes, even though they are no longer with us, as a good person. I think that's sort of a universal desire among most people. I know, speaking for myself, about 10 years ago, I lost my grandfather, who was a very important, person in my life. I was very close to him growing up. I was very close to him into my young adult years. Due to some sort of unfortunate family garbage, I had to take probably a 10 or 15 year break with him, but I was eternally grateful towards the end of his life when I was able to reintroduce him into my life. And he's somebody who passed away, I think, about 10 years ago at this point in time. But whenever I hear this song, he is one of the people I think of because, I do think of him every single day. There's a picture of him. You can't see it the way the camera's set up, but there is a picture of him here in my record room, sort of right next to this door. Every time I walk out that door, he's sitting there staring right at me. And I have that desire in my life to live up to his expectations, be the kind of man that he would be proud of. I feel the same way about my father, who is not only one of my best friends, but also one of my heroes. Now, fortunately, my father is still with me on this planet, but it's the same thing. Every day I leave the house, I think to myself, I want to be the type of person that my father could be proud of. I want to bring a little bit of positivity into this world, whether it is, passion for music, maybe a cheap grin, anything. This is one of my favorite songs on the record because it always makes me think of the people that came before me and how important to me their opinion of me is. Now, I know it's easy to play tough. Say, I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit no matter what. And if you genuinely feel that way, God bless you, but I don't. To me, this is one of my favorite songs on the entire record. The next song after that is a song called That's the Way Life Goes. I love this song. It's funny because this song has a really great, positive, upbeat intro. It kind of gets your hopes up, like, okay. And then it just, takes a hard left into, this depressing world of alcoholism and domestic violence. Whenever I hear this song, I can't help but wonder, is this sort of the song that Jimmy Cliff grew up in? Is this something that he witnessed as an outsider? It is not a very upbeat song. This song kind of makes you feel like you'd like to go into therapy and at least take a shower. The song after that, which closes out the record, is the song Come Into My Life, especially after the last song, which I think That's the Way Life Goes is probably the darkest moment on this record. Come Into My Life is simple. It's a nice, pretty love song. It's kind of a nice way to close out the record. Like I said, there's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of social ills on this record. But this song leaves you feeling as if you've sort of taken, a musical shower. This song, to me, always leaves me feeling clean and optimistic. So I think it's a good way to close out the record. I don't know if that was any of the thought that was put into putting that song towards the end of the record, but I think it's a perfect way to close out the record. So for me, this is easily my favorite Jimmy Cliff record. And I really celebrate the guy's entire catalog, really. I mean, he is somebody who has remained incredibly consistent over the years. Now, like a lot of, established Jamaican artists, he did put out a little bit of cheese in the, during the second half of the 1980s. But it was really nothing, criminal. It was nothing quite as bad as some other artists of his, generation did. I've seen Jimmy Cliff 3 times over the years. Now, I have not seen him. The last time I saw him was after Rebirth came out, which was in 2012. So it's been a while since I've seen Jimmy Cliff live. But in my experience, having seen him live 3 times, he is always incredible live. He sounds great. He's got a great energy. He really, he goes back and he plays songs sort of from throughout his entire catalog, which is something I always look forward to. Jimmy Cliff just put out his latest record, Refugees, in 2022. This is a record I like. I wouldn't say that I love. I have listened to it a handful of times. I think it's one of those that if I were to give it more of my attention, I think it's something that would grow on me more over time. Of course, that record came out 10 years after Rebirth, which came out in 2012, which I thought was just incredible. To me, Rebirth was one of my favorite records from 2012. So if you haven't in a while or at all, go back and check out Jimmy Cliff, Wonderful World, Beautiful People. Or if you're fortunate enough to have the Trojan Records pressing of it, just look for the record Jimmy Cliff. I certainly don't think you'll be disappointed. And if you are somewhat new to Jamaican music, I will give you the same advice that was given to me almost 30 years ago. I think that this record is an excellent Reggae 101, introductory course to the genre. I think it stays true to what the genre is, but it is accessible. It's somewhat user-friendly. And of course, one of the things that I love about Jamaican music, being a big, punk rock person, is I do believe in the the theory, the idea that Jamaican music and punk rock are cousins. Jamaican music, it is back to basics. A lot of the roots reggae, especially, it is revolutionary. It's urban. It's in your face. So to me, reggae and punk, of course, were sort of married in the eyes of people, by Don Letts back during the 1970s in Britain. But to me, it is a marriage that has stood the test of time. There's a reason why a lot of us old, crusty punk people love Jamaican music. And really, apart from punk and post-punk, Jamaican music, reggae, roots reggae in particular, is probably my favorite genre of music. I could not live without this style of music. Now, if you ask my wife, she may indicate to you that she can live without this style of music. But you don't have to agree on everything, do ya? Come on. She's still the jugs, in my opinion. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Listen to the master, Jimmy Cliff. Be sure to check back every week on this channel for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, I'll talk to you then.